Minister, now that you've confirmed that a mere 4 cabinet documents have been turned over to Madam Justice Hogue, how many cabinet documents are being withheld from her?
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Michael Cooper grilled Dominic LeBlanc at committee earlier Thursday morning for the fact that the government has only released 4, count them, 4 of the cabinet documents that was requested by the public inquiry.
Let's take a look.
Minister, my pleasure to have you here. Thank you for making the time in your schedule. Mr. Cooper, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister LeBlanc, the Globe and Mail reported on May 23rd that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are withholding an undisclosed number of documents from Madam Justice Hogue, the Commissioner of the Inquiry on Foreign Interference. And the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO, has confirmed that the documents turned over to her, that nearly 10% of those have been redacted. I underscore the documents that are being withheld are documents that Madam Justice Hogue has requested to fulfill her mandate. So what is the Prime Minister hiding from Madam Justice Hogue?
So, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Cooper, thank you for the question. The Prime Minister and the government are hiding nothing from the Hogue Commission. The redactions you referred to, and again, if colleagues want technical explanations, Madame Drouin, I'm sure can provide them, but my understanding is those redactions relate to solicitor-client privilege or cabinet confidence, and that is a fundamental principle of our Westminster parliamentary system. But in no way is the government working at counter purposes to the Commission. As I said, there is an active, ongoing conversation on exactly those documents that Mr. Cooper referred to.
Yeah, but here's the problem, LeBlanc. Way back, when this was announced, you had said, nobody else, you had said that Justice Hogue would be provided with any document, whether it be cabinet confidence or not, that she needed, and she would have unfettered access. That's what you said.
Justice Hogue will have full access to all relevant cabinet documents, as well as all other information she deems relevant for the purposes of her inquiry.
Now you're turning around and saying, oh, well, some of these redactions, they're related to cabinet confidence, and that's just how our system works. You can't have it both ways. You either give her the documents that she needs, or you're going to look guilty as hell to all Canadians, and it looks like you're hiding something.
I do want to point out, however, because I think it needs to be pointed out, that Dominic LeBlanc is in committee. You cannot summon a minister to committee. You can ask them nicely to come, and if they decide not to, then they just don't show up. They can't be summoned the way other witnesses can.
Yeah, and you cannot hold them in contempt of Parliament if they've refused to come towards committee as well. So it's their ministerial privilege, as it were.
And through you, Mr. Chair, Minister, with respect to that active ongoing conversation, the reason there's a conversation is because the government is obstructing the work of Madam Justice Hogue. The government is not turning over documents that she sees as relevant to fulfilling her mandate. And I would note that this committee received a letter from counsel to the commissioner that indicated that with regards to the turning over of documents that Madam Justice Hogue has requested, quote, the interest of the Commission and the interest of the committee would appear to align. So again, I repeat, what is the Prime Minister hiding? And I'll further ask, would you provide the assurance that at the end of these discussions, Madam Justice Hogue will receive every document that she has requested on an unredacted basis?
So, Mr. Chair, our colleague repeated his question. I'll repeat the answer. The government and the Prime Minister are obviously hiding absolutely nothing. We happily set up the commission with the work and the support of recognized political parties.
You happily set up the commission?
You guys dragged your feet kicking and screaming the whole way. You guys tried to cover up the whole thing with a special rapporteur. Special rapporteur.
The best way to move forward on this is not with a public inquiry that would have to happen behind closed doors.
Yeah, like you happily set up a... Dominic, come on. Like, there's lies and then there's lies. Come on.
You need your Jim Carrey meme.
Live streams only.
Cooper's House Leader, who's a friend of mine, Andrew Scheer, and I worked. And in fact, the terms of reference that were accepted by every party represented at this table contemplated the release of the cabinet documents the Commission has, and also contemplated the protection of cabinet confidence and solicitor-client privilege. So none of this is a surprise.
Minister, I would submit that it is unacceptable for the Prime Minister to pick and choose which documents Madam Justice Hogue can see. Part of Madam Justice Hogue's mandate is to examine decisions made by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet in respect of foreign interference and what the Prime Minister did or failed to do. And in that regard, I would submit the Prime Minister is in a conflict. Again, if he has nothing to hide, then turn over the documents.
And here's the other really important aspect to this, because some people may say, some people that really pay attention to how Parliament works, they may say, well, listen, certain documents in cabinet confidence, must be protected, and they can't necessarily be released to the public. Fair. Any government, fair. But here's the really important part. When we started looking at the public inquiry, and when the hearings started in March, they were very boring hearings to the general public. Why was that? Because they actually weren't examining any witnesses at that point. So what were they doing? They were spending all of those days debating and discussing how to keep information confidential, setting up the rules of engagement on how to actually look at intelligence documents, look at cabinet confidence documents, and incorporate that into the inquiry in a way that protects the integrity of the document. And the reason they were able to do that is because the members of the inquiry, including Justice Hogue, was given special security clearance to be able to view those documents. So there's no excuse here. Absolutely none. And the Conservatives are going to be partisan to a degree on a lot of this, but in this case, Michael Cooper is absolutely correct. He's saying, listen, if the judge's mandate is to actually examine what happened during all of these elections and determine what the Prime Minister knew and when he knew it and what decisions he made, then she has to have access to cabinet confidence documents, full stop.
Well, and there was a quote that we had read out in one of our previous videos. You'll have to excuse me that I don't recall who said it, but it was essentially that if the government is refusing to hand over these documents, you have to expect that there is something they're trying to hide.
So again, our colleague repeats the same question for
I
his...
pointed out a clear conflict on the part of the Prime Minister, insofar as a major part of the mandate of Madam Justice Hogue is to examine what the Prime Minister did or failed to do.
So it won't surprise you that characterizing that as a clear conflict is not a submission that I would respect. I think it's interesting, Mr. Chair, there have been 44 federal commissions of inquiry since 1977. Only 5 of them have had access to cabinet confidence. 4 of them were under Liberal governments, actually headed by Prime Ministers called Trudeau. And the fifth one involved the decision.
Minister,
Mr. Chair, I was answering the question.
Mr. Cooper, I'm going to stop the clock so as to allow you an opportunity to have one more question, but we have invited the minister here to answer questions. I'm going to provide him the opportunity to finish. I'd ask you let him finish that answer in respect to your question, and then I'll start the clock. I'll start the clock again, okay? But let's let him finish the question, or the answer rather.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you. So, as I said, 4 commissions headed by Liberal governments where the Prime Minister was called Trudeau. The 5th one, these are 5 of 44. that have had access to cabinet confidence. So it tells you it's a very unusual process. And the fifth one was a decision made by the late Brian Mulrooney with respect to cabinet confidence in the Oliphant inquiry. So again, Mr. Chair, what's important is that the opposition parties agreed to those terms of reference. And of course, now they're manufacturing a lot of indignation with respect to this issue.
Well,
okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Just so I'm clear, I'm going to restart the clock now, okay? Go ahead, sir.
Well,
Was that an impartial Liberal chair?
Well, it's early. But seems like it. That was quite fair of Mr. Carr. So good on
job,
you.
yeah.
Good on you. Keep doing that. Keep doing that. Don't listen to the whispers.
We need more impartial Liberal chairs.
But I find it interesting that so this is the Standing Committee for Procedure and House Affairs, also affectionately known as not OGO, but PROC. And there used to be a chair, and that was MP Chagger. She and Cooper didn't really get along too well. And I find it interesting that she is no longer there, but Cooper is. So,
is it possible that this is just the vice chair and she was unavailable for the day?
No, this is the new chair.
This is the new chair. He's permanent. Okay.
Yeah, this is the new chair. And it's just interesting because we had called out many instances where she was not being objective. And hopefully that was noticed. So.
Yeah. She was not a good chair, in my opinion. Not just because she's a Liberal, but because she was not impartial. But this guy seems to be doing a pretty good job so far.
She would have to, in our opinion, temper tantrums and go on tirades and lecture committee and all of that. So
she wasn't as bad as Khalid, but
no.
I think if she put in some practice, she could get there.
She was Khalid light.
the Prime Minister isn't just hiding documents from Madam Justice Hogue. The annual report of NSICOP, released on June 5th, states that the Prime Minister and the government withheld over 1,000 documents from NSICOP and that it is, quote, inappropriately using claims of cabinet confidences to avoid disclosing information. Isn't that exactly what is happening here? And I will repeat again, and it's a very simple yes or no question. Will the Prime Minister turn over every document that Madam Justice Hogue has requested whenever these discussions come to an end?
So, Mr. Chair, our colleague...
Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, our colleague raised NSICOP, or the National Security Intelligence Review Agency. It's Parliament itself in the legislation that protected cabinet confidence when those bodies were created. Neither of the acts that created those bodies created exceptions in terms of access to cabinet confidence.
So what's the point, LeBlanc? You guys have been going on and on and on and on and on and on about NSIRA and NSICOP, or NSICOP, or however the heck you want to say the acronym, and about them being effective tools to combat foreign interference. And we take foreign interference very seriously. As we keep hearing Chrystia Freeland about everything, like, we take toilet paper very seriously. So what's the point of silencing and muting all of those members if they can't review cabinet confidence? What's the point?
I think the whole point of NSIRA and NSICOP is that the government can say, look, we've done something. If something was going on, these guys would have caught it. It's a smokescreen.
100%. It's just, look, we did something. Nobody else has done it. We did something. And look, they're doing something. We're not giving them everything that they asked for, but they're doing something. Like, so, this isn't a good look.
No, it's not.
When you're saying we're not hiding anything, but we're not letting you see everything that needs to be seen, especially by the judge that is in charge of the public inquiry on foreign interference. And one of the main objectives of that inquiry is to restore trust by the public in the electoral system and the government. And your choice is, well, we're just going to hide things. You've failed your goal.
Exceptionally, the Prime Minister has authorized the disclosure of cabinet documents to those bodies. And so, Mr. Chair, I can tell our colleague that at the end of the process that is ongoing and is collaborative, and I hope that somebody will ask Madame Drouin, who has insight into those ongoing conversations with the Commission. It would be inappropriate for me, and it's not politicians that decide what
the
documents
answer
are reacted
appears
no.
to be no, since the minister has refused, I think, at least 3 times to answer that question. And it's clear that the Prime Minister is conveniently withholding documents from Madam Justice Hogue because he does not want her to be able to fully scrutinize his failures to protect our sovereignty and democracy from Beijing's interference.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Thank you, Minister.
Just because Mr. Cooper
Sure.
keeps asserting the same thing does not make it true.
Because Minister LeBlanc keeps non-answering the question doesn't make it false.
Well, and he said that right at the end for the benefit of all of us watching.
Yeah, which is why I said what I said, for the benefit of all of us watching.
What's important also is not just specific incidences, of course that is important, but to the whole question around what did the government do about foreign interference issues and concerns. It does go to the question of policy and not necessarily tied to a specific incident. And if those documents are withheld, how will the commissioner be able to determine what did the government do about it? Because those are precisely related to policy discussions. And shouldn't it be that it would be up to the commissioner to determine whether or not that information is relevant and important for her to fulfill her mandate and not for the government? Because if it was up to the government, we wouldn't actually be sitting here at the moment. We probably wouldn't even need the inquiry.
Ms. Kwan, we're over time, but I'm going to permit an answer.
Sure,
to your question.
so I agree with Ms. Kwan, Mr. Chair, in the sense that the cabinet documents that considered policy choices, legislative options, and so on around foreign interference were the 4 documents that were given to the cabinet. Those were the time where I and my predecessors went to cabinet with specific proposals around strengthening our democracy. So those documents were shared. I don't want to be technical with Ms. Kwan, but no government, and it's a fundamental principle of a Westminster parliamentary system, no government since Confederation is going to evacuate cabinet confidence to somebody other than the sitting head of the government. In the case, it's the Prime Minister personally, as it was when Mr. Mulroney waived cabinet confidence, and as it was when Pierre Elliott Trudeau did with respect to the MacDonald Commission in the 1970s, and as it is the case where the current Prime Minister did with respect to the Hague Commission. And that was well known. It was very clear in the terms of reference, Mr. Chair, that protecting solicitor-client privilege and cabinet confidence was well understood. Now the back and forth process will obviously allow the Hague Commission to do the important work that I agree with Ms. Kwan they need to do.
4 documents. Now we don't know how many they requested, but
that's
4.
what they got, is 4.
And I love that, Jenny Kwan had made the point, and we agree with it, that if it were up to the Liberal government, yes, they wouldn't even be sitting here. We wouldn't need a public inquiry. Everything is just fine, thank you very much. But obviously, that's not the case, which is why we're sitting here, which is why we have an inquiry, because they screwed the pooch.
Well, and if I understand correctly, what LeBlanc was saying there at the end was that the Prime Minister can waive cabinet confidence and present those documents to the Hague Commission.
He sure can. He has the authority to do that.
Why isn't he?
Well, and that's the thing. The irony is he says, oh, well, Mulroney waived it. Trudeau's dad waived it and Harper waived it. And he's trying to say, well, and the current Prime Minister waived it. He waived 4.
What about the rest of the stuff? Like, Trudeau is trying to control, like, this whole foreign interference narrative. Like, right at the beginning, he was trying to brush it off, saying we're all racist for inquiring about it. And then he tried to have his buddy David Johnston be the special rapporteur to determine whether or not Canadians needed a foreign interference. And Johnston was going to say, no, we didn't. And then he quit. And now we have a foreign interference inquiry.
Right. And now, and this is where we called it in the beginning, that Justice Hogue may be, a decent pick for a head of the inquiry.
I think she is.
And I think we're seeing it now, because if she was just a Liberal shill, she wouldn't be, she wouldn't be asking for more documents.
No, she
and
wouldn't
letting
be,
people know.
She wouldn't be pushing this hard.
Right.
And she wouldn't be doing it publicly.
Right. So you wouldn't have mainstream media reporting on the fact that the head of the inquiry is not getting all the documents that she wants. And I would hope that when she's done her report, that what she includes in it is that one of the concerning factors of my inquiry and my report is the fact that I could not complete my mandate as I see it because I was not able to review all of the documents that I requested. So the problem is this whole inquiry is going to have the shadow of doubt and suspicion hanging over it after it's done. So great job, Trudeau. In trying to restore trust in the public electoral system, you've made it worse.
Thanks very much, Ms. Kwan. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, Minister, now that you've confirmed that a mere 4 cabinet documents have been turned over to Madam Justice Hogue, how many cabinet documents are being withheld from her?
Mr. Chair, I don't have the specific number. Those are decisions that perhaps Madame Drouin could elaborate on, but I also think it's a fundamental principle.
It was just a simple question. How many documents have been withheld? You can't answer that. I find it astounding that a mere 4 documents have been turned over to Madam Justice Hogue that Madame Drouin said were deemed to be the most relevant. Who determined those documents to be the most relevant? The Prime Minister, the PCO, Madam Justice Hogue? Who determined that?
I did with your House Leader, Mr. Cooper, last summer.
I don't think that is accurate. And since that time, Madam Justice Hogue has requested additional documents that are being withheld by your government, documents that go to the heart, potentially, about what the Prime Minister did or didn't do about foreign interference. I'm going to ask you a different question because we know that you have confirmed when I asked you by refusing to answer that the Prime Minister will not turn over all of the documents requested by Madam Justice Hogue. But on another matter of concern, when you appeared at the Public Safety Committee, I asked you twice if you could provide the assurance that no one serving in Justin Trudeau's cabinet is among the MPs named in the NSICOP report who wittingly collaborated with a hostile foreign state. Twice you refused to answer that question, so I'm going to ask you a third time. Can you provide that assurance?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Cooper has asked that question a number of times in committee and in the House of Commons. My answer remains the same. I took note of what Deputy Commissioner Flynn of the RCMP said when he testified yesterday before a committee as well. Getting into precisions with respect to specific intelligence information, including the numbers of people that may be a source of comments in various intelligence documents, is not something that we're permitted to do. And again, Mr. Cooper can ask the same question, but he's going to get the same answer, Mr. Chair.
In fact, the Prime Minister saw the NSICOP report. The Prime Minister made the final determination with respect to the redactions. The Prime Minister blacklisted the names of those MPs. So I'll ask you this. Can you provide the assurance that once Madam Justice Hogue completes her work, that the names of the MPs who wittingly collaborated with hostile foreign states will be made public?
Mr. Chair, just to correct again another falsehood that Mr. Cooper asserted, that the Prime Minister made those redactions in the NSICOP report, I would draw...
Just to correct the falsehood that you're accusing Mr. Cooper of making, he didn't say that the Prime Minister made the redactions. He said he had the final authority, which he does. So that is true. And this is kind of the whole problem with this NSICOP committee, because they're only allowed to be fed information through the Prime Minister's office. So if the Prime Minister and his government are doing shady things, well, he gets to hold that stuff back then, doesn't he? Now, when it comes to his answer about, well, we can't really release names and that's not the way to do things. Well, I'm sorry, but there needs to be a new process then. Because if you have members of a sitting government that are wittingly collaborating with a foreign state, your answer is, well, we can't release those names right now. I'm sorry, that doesn't wash.
Canadians deserve to know who is collaborating with foreign governments.
Right. We're their boss. And plus, there could be ministers. It could be the deputy prime minister. It could be the prime minister.
We have no idea, and we deserve to know who is interfering in our democracy.
100%. And it's not like this is one intelligence report. This has been concluded by the NSICOP committee. So there's obviously been some due diligence there. And again, they didn't say allegedly. They didn't say they might. They didn't say, oh, it's possible. They said that they did.
Well, thanks to Jagmeet, at least we know that one of them was hot dog.
Right? Right? I swear he should get arrested for that. Just
He
saying.
should.
Him to comments of Alex Ruff, who made it very clear before the committee that none of the redactions of the NSICOP report were made by any political person, by a political staffer, by a minister, and the idea that the Prime Minister has a black marker
the Prime
and
Minister
spends
has
his
the
time
final authority,
redacting the
Minister, and
NSICOP.
you know it. But I
Mr.
asked
Cooper
you a
knows.
simple
Mr.
question.
Cooper knows. Mr. Chair.
I asked
Mr.
you a
Cooper knows
simple
it's fake.
question.
Hey. Okay. Just a minute here. First of all, the interpreters have a job to do. Second of all, there's no quality answer and no quality question that can be given or asked when we can't make out what's being said. I've stopped the clock. Minister, I'm going to give you the floor. If in about the next 15 seconds you can finish that response, Mr. Cooper, there's a minute 21 remaining. You'll have the opportunity to resume your line of questioning. Minister, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think it's important not to assert something in a preamble to a question that's completely inaccurate, that his colleague clarified, and then move on to another question. It doesn't do a service for the public understanding of this issue.
Thanks, Minister. I'm going to restart the clock. A minute 21, Mr. Cooper.
Minister, answer the question. Can you provide the assurance that once Madam Justice Hogue completes her work, that the names of the MPs who wittingly collaborated with hostile foreign states, or any foreign state for that matter, wittingly and knowingly, will be made public?
I like this chair.
I think he's afraid of Cooper.
I think we're all afraid of Cooper.
Yeah, in that.
That he's so awesome.
Yeah, he's a really good MP, and he's really good at a committee.
I would not want to be on Cooper's bad side. We'll just say that.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to offer legal advice to a Court of Appeal justice on what would be her obligations in terms of a public report with respect to national security information. Again, if you assert the falsehood in the question and ask for an answer, it doesn't make the premise accurate.
So you can't provide that assurance. Can you at least provide the assurance, given that the Prime Minister knows the names of the MPs who wittingly collaborated with hostile foreign states, including potentially MPs in the Liberal caucus, that none of those MPs will have their nomination papers signed by the Prime Minister to run in the next election? Will you provide that, at least that assurance?
Minister, we've got
if you're not going to be transparent in any other respect.
About 10 seconds to answer that, Mr.
Yeah, so I think it might be more constructive for Mr. Cooper's leader to accept the government's offer to receive the security clearance and see the unredacted report that Mr. Cooper seems to be happy to talk about, not having seen it. It might be more useful if his leader saw the report, and then he might be able to make those very judgments that Mr. Cooper referred to a second ago.
Wrong. He wouldn't be able to make those judgments. Well, maybe he could make the judgments, but he certainly couldn't do anything about it, because after seeing the report, Pierre would not be permitted to speak about it or take any disciplinary action against anybody in his caucus, potentially, who might be there, who is interfering with foreign governments.
Right. Or maybe he is allowed, because Jagmeet blurted it out on like live TV.
That was so dumb.
As Janice was trying to get the RCMP to get off their butts and go and arrest Jagmeet, but that's another story. But this is the thing, and honestly, Cooper's last question was a really reasonable one. So essentially what he was asking is that, okay, fine, you're not going to talk about the names, fine. Will the Prime Minister commit that if there's anyone in the Liberal caucus that are named as these witting collaborators, that for the next election, he will not sign their nomination papers, meaning they would not be able to run in the next election. And nobody has to be named, and you wouldn't necessarily know who it was. But that's a reasonable question, and that can be, at least LeBlanc could say, I can't speak on behalf of the Prime Minister, but I can take that away. That's all he would have to say.
And that's important for Canadians, because Canadians want to know that they're not voting for somebody who's in league with a foreign government.
And that's a really easy answer, folks. That should be a yes. Yes, the Prime Minister can assure Canadians that any MP that may have wittingly collaborated with a foreign state is not going to get to run in the next election. So that's the bare minimum here. Now, what should be happening is any MPs that are suspected of that should have their security clearance revoked if they have any. They should be suspended without pay, investigated, and then determined if that is actually the case. That's what should happen, because you know what? That's what happens in every private organization in this country. And it happens in the government too, a la Cameron McDonald and Tony Utano. But different strokes for different folks, as with this Liberal Party. So, this is where we're at. And the silver lining here is the more we go down this path and the closer we get to the next election, the more panicked that the Liberals actually get, because they know that the Conservatives are getting closer and closer to the truth. And they're not going to be able to hide from this for very much longer. And it's going to be very interesting to see what Justice Hogue's conclusions are going to be about this foreign interference inquiry, given the fact that she's not being given information by the Prime Minister, which is part of the whole problem of why we have a foreign interference problem. A la Jenny Kwan, Michael Chong, Aaron O'Toole, and others. Because they had foreign countries take actions against them, and the Liberals didn't tell them. So that should be the first conclusion. Well, the Prime Minister doesn't tell anybody when stuff actually happens.